Welcome to Conspiracist. Today we're undertaking a deep dive into a really compelling hypothesis, the idea that governments might be actively concealing evidence related to satellite mind control signals.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and frankly pretty persistent idea that pops up.
Absolutely. And we've gathered quite a bit of information looking at this from different angles, the theory of mind influence, satellite tech capabilities, and even the psychology behind why people might believe these things.
Right, so the goal today is really to unpack the core arguments, look at any evidence that's presented, and try to understand the tech and the psychological factors.
And crucially, we're aiming to do this with a strictly professional, objective viewpoint. No jumping to conclusions either way.
Exactly, just laying out what the sources say.
Okay, so maybe we should start with the term itself. Mind control. What does that actually mean in the context of our sources?
Well, the popular idea is often quite dramatic: direct manipulation of thoughts, forcing actions, that sort of thing.
Like something out of science fiction.
Precisely. But when you look at how it's discussed more academically, it's often a broader concept. It touches on things like psychological associations, social pressures, behavioral modification techniques.
And even social engineering on a larger scale.
Yes, especially when considering nation states and their, let's say, strategic goals. It's about influence, often subtle.
And the sources also mentioned the internet's role here, how it's maybe blurred the lines.
Definitely. The ease of spreading information and sometimes disinformation online means it's harder for people to distinguish between, established knowledge and these kinds of government conspiracy theories about secret technologies.
Okay, that sets the stage. Let's pivot to the technology itself. Satellites and brainwaves. One source really digs into the science of trying to detect brainwaves using satellite radio telescopes. What are the big hurdles there?
The fundamental challenge is the physics of brainwaves themselves. They operate at incredibly low frequencies. We're talking about roughly 0.5 to 25 hertz, very, very low.
And that frequency range poses a problem for detection from space.
A massive one. Detecting signals with such long wavelengths requires really specialized, large-scale radio telescope systems. Think about the giant radio telescopes you see on Earth. You'd need something comparable, potentially even more sensitive, in orbit.
It's not just like pointing a small dish.
Not at all. And then there's a resolution issue. I think you mentioned pinpointing the source earlier.
Yeah, how do you pick out one person?
Exactly. A telescope's ability to distinguish fine details at spatial resolution depends directly on the wavelength it's observing and the size of its antenna or baseline. With wavelengths as long as those from brainwaves, getting the resolution needed to isolate one individual's signals from orbit is, well, it's considered practically impossible with known physics and technology.
So even if you could detect something, you wouldn't know whose brain it was, or even if it was a brain.
Pretty much. And that ties into the other major problem mentioned, the confusion issue.
Right, what's that about?
It's simply that the 0.5 to 25 hertz range isn't exclusive to brains. Lots of other things, natural phenomena like atmospheric disturbances, maybe even some types of electronics, emit signals in or near that same frequency band.
So it's noisy up there, electronically speaking.
Extremely noisy in that specific band. Any potential brainwave signal would be completely drowned out by this background clutter. It's like trying to hear one specific person whispering across a packed football stadium during a game.
Okay, so the technical barriers seem formidable, to say the least.
Based on current scientific understanding, yes, very significant.
Now, you mentioned science fiction earlier. Mind control is a staple trope there. Do the sources comment on how sci-fi handles this versus reality?
They do. The consensus seems to be that the easy, direct mind control you see in stories is mostly a narrative shortcut. It serves the plot, but it rarely has a plausible scientific explanation behind it, even within the fiction itself sometimes.
So writers don't usually bother explaining how it works.
Often not in detail, or they invent some kind of techno-babble. The sources also touch on the deeper question, the link between brain activity and consciousness. While they're clearly related, science is still figuring out the exact mechanisms. The idea of external control is even more complex and speculative.
So if direct satellite to brain control seems scientifically unlikely right now, where does this idea of government mind control efforts come from? Is there a non-satellite angle?
Well, looking historically, the sources do talk about psychological warfare, or psyops, and information warfare. These are established techniques used by nations.
Aimed at influencing populations.
Exactly. Influencing behavior, opinions, morale, achieving strategic goals without direct military conflict. Some might argue that modern, sophisticated information campaigns, especially online, could be seen as a form of large-scale influence. Maybe not mind control in the sci-fi sense, but certainly attempting to shape thoughts and actions collectively.
Which brings us to the psychology of belief. Why do these specific, often quite elaborate conspiracy theories take root, like the satellite mind control one?
There's a lot going on psychologically. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, which is usually helpful, but sometimes we see patterns or connections that aren't really there. Conspiracy theories can also provide simple answers to complex or frightening events.
Offering a sense of understanding, maybe? Or
Yeah.
control?
Yes, exactly. In uncertain times, a narrative that explains what's really going on, even if it's a conspiracy, can feel more comforting than randomness or complexity. It gives a sense of order, identifies a clear enemy.
And do our thinking styles play into this? Some sources mention cognitive biases.
Research does suggest links. For instance, a tendency towards more intuitive gut-feeling decisions, rather than slow analytical thinking, seems correlated with believing in conspiracies. There's also mention of a jumping to conclusions bias, making up your mind with limited evidence.
So being quick to assume.
Right. And conversely, the sources suggest that developing strong critical thinking skills, questioning assumptions, evaluating evidence, considering alternative explanations, can help people better assess these kinds of extraordinary claims.
Now, some of the language used in these claims is quite specific and technical sounding. Things like deep tech, wireless, synthetic, telepathic technology, or remote neural monitoring. What do the sources say about these specific concepts?
Those terms definitely appear in the materials, often in accounts from individuals who believe they are being targeted. The descriptions sometimes involve microwaves or sound waves or even ultrasound, supposedly used to induce thoughts, sounds, or feelings.
And sometimes linked to satellites.
Yes, the narrative often includes satellite involvement for surveillance, for delivering these effects, sometimes using concepts like silent sound or voice-to-skull technology. V2K is a common abbreviation, you see.
Voice to skull, meaning hearing voices induced externally.
That's the claim. Alongside things like wireless hypnotized technology or brain controllers operating remotely, there are also mentions of sonic weapons using ultrasound or microwaves, allegedly causing physical harm, or infrasound affecting vision.
That sounds incredibly distressing for anyone believing they're experiencing it.
Yeah.
How do the sources address people who make these reports?
It's a sensitive area. Some materials note that individuals reporting these experiences are often diagnosed with mental health conditions. There's a suggestion in some sources that perhaps the medical field isn't fully aware of or doesn't acknowledge the possibility of such technologies, leading to misdiagnosis.
So a disconnect between the reported experience and mainstream understanding.
Yes, and we see accounts of people who genuinely believe a satellite-based AI is controlling their lives, communicating telepathically. It highlights the profound distress involved, regardless of the underlying cause.
It's also interesting that this isn't just individuals making claims. One source mentioned governments accusing other governments.
That's right. There was a specific mention of the U.S. accusing China of developing brain control weaponry. And the fact that Chile actually passed laws related to neuro rights and neuroprotection suggests a growing awareness and concern at a state level about the potential misuse of brain-related technologies.
Even if the specifics, like satellite mind control, are debatable, the broader field of neurotechnology is clearly advancing.
Undeniably. And that progress itself might fuel anxieties about potential misuse.
Let's circle back to remote neural monitoring, or RNM. What are the typical features of claims involving RNM?
RNM claims often describe a kind of ultimate surveillance state. We're talking alleged capabilities like real-time mind reading, viewing thoughts on a screen, controlling bodily functions, even manipulating dreams or implanting false memories wirelessly.
Using the target's eyes as cameras.
That's another claim that appears essentially hijacking someone's sensory input and output. These alleged neuroweapons, or RNM modules, are often described as being linked to satellite networks to enable this constant remote monitoring and control.
The implications, if any of that were feasible, would be staggering. Privacy, autonomy.
Absolutely. These claims represent the most extreme fears about loss of privacy and bodily integrity through technology.
This really highlights the challenge of sorting through information. How do we distinguish between plausible future tech, current scientific reality, and, well, pseudoscience?
That's a huge question, even for scientists and philosophers. But generally, pseudoscience often presents itself as absolute truth, resists scrutiny or revision, asks loaded questions, demonizes critics, and relies heavily on anecdotes or emotional appeals rather than testable evidence and rigorous methods.
It lacks that self-correcting mechanism that science ideally has.
Exactly. Science is constantly testing, refining, even discarding old ideas based on new evidence. Pseudoscience tends to cling to its core tenets regardless of contradictory evidence.
Which loops back to the importance of critical thinking skills we discussed earlier.
Definitely. Being able to analyze claims, check sources, understand logical fallacies, and recognize the hallmarks of pseudoscience is crucial when navigating topics like this, where the claims are often dramatic and technical sounding.
Some sources also bring up neuroweapons more broadly and brain vulnerabilities. What's the gist there?
There's discussion around the potential weaponization of findings in neuroscience, concerns about hypothetical covert technologies targeting cognitive processes. Sometimes concepts like scalar waves are mentioned, though their existence and effects are highly controversial and not part of mainstream physics.
And nanotechnology.
Yes, there's speculation about interactions between potential nanotechnologies and electromagnetic fields affecting the brain, often coupled with concerns about a lack of international regulation or oversight for such hypothetical developments.
Okay, let's talk about something more established, scientifically speaking. Radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, or RFEMR. We're bathed in it daily, from phones, Wi-Fi, etc. What do the sources say about its actual effects on the brain?
Right. This is a heavily researched area because of its ubiquity. RF, EMR from communications tech, and also the extremely low-frequency fields, ELF, EMF, from power lines and appliances, have been studied extensively.
What have they found?
Studies have looked at effects on neurotransmitter levels, calcium signaling in neurons, even gene expression. Some research suggests potential links to oxidative stress in brain cells.
But what about causing specific thoughts or behavioral changes, like the mind control hypothesis suggests?
Well, the findings on behavioral or cognitive effects are quite mixed. Many studies, especially those mimicking real-world exposure levels, like from cell phones, haven't found consistent, measurable negative effects on cognition or behavior under the specific conditions tested. There's no established scientific evidence showing that typical environmental RF exposure can be used for precise thought control.
So while research continues on potential health effects, it's a big leap to mind control.
A very significant leap, based on the current scientific consensus described in our sources.
To add some historical perspective, the CIA's MKUltra program often comes up in these discussions. How does that fit in?
MKUltra was a real, documented CIA program during the Cold War. They experimented with drugs like LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation, often unethically and without consent, trying to find ways to control minds or extract information.
Did they succeed in finding reliable mind control methods?
The program was officially shut down in the 70s, and the consensus is they didn't really achieve the kind of reliable, targeted control they were looking for, but its existence and the secrecy surrounding it definitely sowed distrust and provides historical fuel for theories about ongoing secret government mind control research.
And the Soviets were supposedly doing similar things.
Yes, reports suggest the Soviet Union also researched mind control, potentially involving electromagnetic radiation during the same period. It was a Cold War concern on both sides.
Finally, there are a couple of tragic, real-world cases mentioned, Aaron Alexis and Myron May. How do they relate?
These are really sad examples. Aaron Alexis, who committed the Washington Navy Yard shooting, reportedly believed he was being controlled by extremely low-frequency ELF electromagnetic waves. Myron May, the Florida State University shooter, also expressed intense anxiety about government surveillance and hearing voices he believed were external.
So these individuals held beliefs very similar to the hypotheses we've been discussing.
Yes, and their actions, while resulting from complex factors including likely mental illness, tragically illustrate the real-world impact such beliefs can have on individuals and society. It underscores the seriousness of the experiences people report, even if the underlying explanation remains debated.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've covered a lot of ground. We looked at the core hypothesis, governments hiding satellite mind control. We examined the significant scientific and technical challenges involved in detecting or influencing specific brain activity from space.
Right. The physics of brain waves, the resolution limits, the background noise, these are major obstacles according to the scientific perspective in our sources.
We also touched on how mind control is portrayed versus reality, the history of psychological warfare, and the potential role of advanced neurotechnology, even if its current capabilities are often exaggerated in conspiracy narratives.
And importantly, we discuss the psychological side, why these beliefs might form and persist. Cognitive biases, the need for answers in uncertain times, and the power of narrative seem to play a big role.
We saw claims about specific technologies like RNM and V2K, the distressing experiences of individuals who believe they are targeted, and the historical context of programs like MKUltra.
And the ongoing research into the actual effects of electromagnetic fields, which, while important for health discussions, doesn't currently support the idea of precise, remote thought control via satellite signals.
So, while the sources acknowledge historical precedents for government interest and influence and the theoretical possibilities of future neurotech, the specific claim of current operational satellite-based mind control of individuals faces immense scientific hurdles.
Exactly. Understanding the difference between theoretical possibilities, actual capabilities, psychological factors, and unsubstantiated claims is really key here. This intersection of technology, psychology, and societal fear makes it a really complex area.
It definitely underscores the need for critical thinking when encountering these kinds of powerful narratives. Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.